Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. Do the Lakers need to make a change in their starting lineup until LeBron returns? That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. It's always going to be free. It's never going to be behind a paywall. Make another Locked On podcast your second listen of every day, but only after making us your first. And a reminder, Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to participate in a gigantic and engage with a gigantic 14,000 person community of Lakers fans, NBA fans who are regular commenters there, and it's just it's a cool place to be, good place to vent, good place to celebrate. Appreciate the support there. We're going to get to these questions about the lineup and whether specifically Malik Beasley might be somebody who needs to leave the starting lineup in favor of something else while Beasley struggles through a major slump as a shooter. We'll get to that. We'll get to an important free agency question that we teased for today's show. But let's start with some housekeeping, Andy. Turns out we don't know if Anthony Davis is going to play both sides of that back-to-back at the beginning of April against the Jazz and the Clippers. Chris Haynes reported yesterday being Tuesday in this particular case, that AD was going to play. Darvin Ham said Wednesday practice, not so fast.
Yeah, I mean, he said ultimately that nothing was being confirmed one way or the other beyond the fact that they were going to be sticking with the plan and like the regiment that they had that led to him not playing in that game against Houston that led to all that controversy and stuff like that. And I think the one thing that we can take sort of that we know that makes all of this an exercise in either taking grains of salt or parsing nuance, semantics, whatever, we don't know the plan. Like, we don't actually know what the plan is. The plan can have a contingency where AD does play in the second end of that back-to-back, which will be against the Clippers. The plan could be him not playing in that game against the Clippers. The plan could involve scenarios where both are live. And the one thing I can promise for sure is nobody's going to be telling us jack bleep when it comes to execs. That's the thing I know.
It's I think, given where those games are, they'd probably like to keep their options open as much as possible. Like, even if he's only going to play one, do you want to let people know which one yet? I mean, while I think the gamesmanship and the competitive advantage thing that sometimes people talk, well, you don't want to reveal it. It's like, there are certain things that coaches across every sport keep secret, or fans think ought to be kept secret, that really don't provide much competitive. Which game Anthony Davis is going to play in, against teams that are critical to that's something you don't need to tell people 3 weeks in advance, especially if you're not entirely sure how hard and fast the plan is. Like you say, it could have contingencies. But it was just interesting to hear Darvin. It's not like Chris Haynes is not exactly out there making stuff up.
No, Chris is both he's very responsible and he's very sourced
and very good. He's very good at what he does. Yeah. So he didn't just invent that, but to hear Darvin kind of walk that back, because I'm sure that's what prompted the questioning to begin with.
Darvin wasn't, to be clear, Darvin wasn't really walking anything back as much as just so people understand. Chris's original report.
Oh, right. It was not it wasn't a quote from Darvin. It was a source
exactly. And it's important, I think, to clarify this, Brian, because Darvin has had to walk back other statements regarding Anthony Davis and his availability and back-to-backs and stuff. I just want to make sure people understand.
Yeah, he wasn't Darvin
didn't step in it again.
Yeah, Darvin wasn't walking his own statement back. He was walking back the report that Haynes put out. So, so there's that. The good news, Andy, Anthony Davis is technically speaking, on the injury report as he is for every game tonight against the Phoenix Suns. But he will play. He is probable. The Suns, though, will be without Kevin Durant. We knew that, but also DeAndre Ayton, who you were convinced, Andy, was going to play in this game because that's how it works, where star players, frontline players on other teams are miraculously healed just in time to play the Lakers. But both Ayton and Durant didn't make the trip, which turns this already must-win game into a game that they can actually, gives them a better chance to win. You're now in the Jock, Landale, Bismack, Biyombo business, which is a different business than the DeAndre Ayton business.
Well, I mean, this opportunity in front of them, which, the Lakers, we've been saying for a while, have to treat every single game as must win, but we are truly in a place now where every single win and loss has really dramatic ramifications, and tying a bow on the whole thing where we began this conversation with AD and the availability with back-to-backs. One thing that would declutter this greatly would be that game against the Clippers, April 5th, I believe it is, a Wednesday, them not facing elimination for the play-in. You know what I mean? Like
no, you're right. If they had a firm place, if they were firmly in that top 10, if they had 7 wrapped up or something like that, makes a big difference.
Right. They still would be looking to win unless moving up is also just mathematically impossible. And I got to be honest, the odds of them not being able to move in either direction on April 5th feels like a long shot to me, but you never know. You never know. But that would decomplicate a lot of these issues. Just don't put yourself in a position where you have to win out the final 3 games of the season in order to guarantee yourself the 10 seed.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. But this is also relevant because not that DeAndre Ayton is exactly he's not seen as Olajuwon defensively or something like that, but he is a much bigger challenge as a total package than Jock Landale, than Bismack Biyombo. It removes a big part of Phoenix's attack, and it becomes a game now where that focus on Anthony Davis and his ability to put an imprint on a game against a Phoenix Suns team that is, they still got Devin Booker, they've still got Chris Paul. What is it? Josh Okogie has played well for them or whatever. But post KD trade, they're a much thinner team than they were before. And so now you take their second, or probably their second best player in terms of night-to-night impact. Chris Paul is not, I was about to say he's still Chris Paul, but
he's not.
Only really in the literal sense. Like his night-to-night impact on games is not what Chris Paul used to be. I mean, DeAndre Ayton, when Kevin Durant is in the lineup, is really their second best player. If they'd beaten Houston, if they beat Dallas, they'd have a little more wiggle room in this one, but they don't anymore. So, I mean, stop me if you've heard this record before.
Yeah. And the last thing I would say with AD on availability and that stuff, what I will find more of a thing to be alarmed about until we, I guess, eventually find out absolute clarity on this last back-to-back. Worry about how he's listed after he's had a full day in between games, because he had said that this is something that really requires a day for the injury and the healing that's still going on to flare down. If they've got like a full game, 2 games or whatever, and AD's listed as questionable, that's when you really ought to be concerned about what the hell's going on.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So Malik Beasley, Andy, has been in just a terrible slump, essentially since arriving in Los Angeles, with a couple games where it appears that he's popping out of it, but no. So with that in mind, do the Lakers need to make a change in the starting lineup? That's next.
Locked On Lakers is brought to you by Ultimate Pro GM, and we are stoked by our new partner and sponsor of today's episode, the mobile game Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your own franchise, your dream can come true with Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. Manage every strategic aspect of your team during the season. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and assistants, training players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of an NBA season. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. It's completely free, playable offline. You can play on the go as you want, whenever you want. And I have created a GM for my team, the Los Angeles Knights. His name is Chaz Bartender. Locked On Lakers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up on the app stores. Again, probasketballgm.com. And again, Locked On Lakers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using that promo code Locked On. Start your dynasty today.
Okay, Andy, we'll get to this question of free agency and it's sort of related to Austin Reeves and a lot of stuff that we talked about for Tuesday's show before the end of it. But we've been kind of kicking around this Malik Beasley problem the Lakers have for the last last week or so, at least. If you haven't looked at the numbers, they're not good. He's shooting 38% as a Laker. 34% from the three-point line, but it's a deceptive 34% because it actually feels worse because it includes 2 or 3 games where he completely goes off. If you look at it game to game, more often than not, far more often than not, Malik Beasley has been under 33% as a three-point shooter with the Lakers. That is why he is here. He is in LA to take and make three-pointers at a pretty high volume because he does not offer a whole lot more beyond that. An assist a game, does come up with a steal, but not a particularly well-regarded defender. What's the play here? The Lakers are certainly in a bit of a bind because Beasley's inability to hit three-pointers is a drag on that starting lineup.
Yeah, during the Orlando game, and Beasley is a topic that I've both tweeted about at Cam Brothers or we've discussed on this show leading up to today. But during the Orlando game, where I believe he was 1 for 7 on the night, I tweeted out Malik Beasley is just a few
1 for 7 overall, 1 for 5 from three-point range.
Yeah, Malik Beasley is just a few more misses away from Darvin Ham having to at least consider giving some of those minutes to Lonnie Walker. And I named Lonnie just because he's really the guy who is next on the depth chart. He's the only guy that's really gotten any type of minutes who is not a regular member of the rotation right now. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself sparked a lot of reaction on Twitter, which was awesome. Again, Cam Brothers, always feel free to hit us up. But it also got me just thinking about the basic options, which would be either, the way I see it, more minutes for Lonnie, like just some of those minutes that had been Beasley's, you give some of them to Lonnie. You could give some minutes to Max Christie, which saw a lot of people calling for on Twitter. More minutes for Rui Hachimura, which is, a different position, but looking for some of the same things scoring. And Rui's actually been playing much better than Beasley as far as the guys who are not necessarily the most multi-dimensional players on the roster. You could also flip the lineup. So Malik Beasley's playing off the bench. Most of the suggestions I've seen there involve Austin Reeves entering the starting lineup, but also a pretty big contingency calling for Rui to move into that lineup and essentially make Troy Brown Jr. a 2-guard. And that was actually something we can get into this. I talked about offline with Darius Soriano over at Silver Screen and Roll and the Lakers Film Room podcast, friend of the show. And also seeing a lot of reaction too, Brian, that Beasley's not the problem. It's the quality of schemes and shots. They need different actions, better setup. And some of this is a function of not having LeBron, which I agree is an issue. It's just not something they can solve.
Right.
So,
I mean, all of this stuff changes dramatically when LeBron's in the lineup. And it all kind of gets to Beasley's an interesting case because, Vanderbilt, for example, Darius, who you mentioned, has a great piece out on Foreign Blue and on Silver Screen and Roll about different numbers that the Lakers have been producing lately. One of which is Vanderbilt's plus minus game to game, which I actually pointed out earlier in this week is terrible. Like the last like 10 days or something like that, whatever it is, he has been a net negative by a lot when he's spent time on the floor, and fans love him because he is, he works so hard and he provides so much energy, and it's been a kind of a nice welcome change in the vibe that the Lakers have. But the actual on-court impact has not been very good, and there are issues around that in terms of where he plays and who's next to him and all this kind of stuff. And that's what happens to role players. You take the same guy, you move him one spot on the floor and take away one player or something like that. The combination's different, and the performance of that role player can change significantly. Beasley, I don't know if that applies in quite the same way, because he's still shooting, he's still but the shot quality question is certainly one that's worth asking. Like, he doesn't need a lot of space to get a shot off, but what angles is he coming off of? How easy is it to clear? Is he getting 80% of what he needs, or is he getting 50% of what he needs? All that stuff is relevant. My big problem is I don't know what you do to solve it if what you're trying to do is open up the floor a little bit. I think, the minute you move Beasley out of the starting lineup, you're essentially punting, I think, at least temporarily, on the idea of trying to help boost the Lakers offense by boosting their 3-point productivity.
Well,
because you can't do it in the same way with Hachimura. You might, you put Troy Brown in there, he's not afraid to take some, but it is harder. And the Lakers offense has been pretty bad since the trade deadline, in part because they're still not, really, they're constantly losing the 3-point battle. Now, if you're taking a lot of 3-pointers and you're still losing the 3-point battle, why are you throwing good money after bad? That's the counter to that, which also makes tremendous sense.
Well, that's actually, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and you and I actually have talked about it a fair amount offline as well. And the conversation that I was having with Darius that came in part from reading his piece, which again people should check out over at Silver Screen and Roll, the idea of Vanderbilt's role and how he's been affected without LeBron, in addition to how Beasley, I'm sure, has been affected without LeBron. Like, I looked up Beasley's percentages from behind the arc, depending on who is passing to him. And for example, it's a small sample size because he hasn't played much with LeBron, but he's shooting 60% on threes from passes with LeBron. In the meantime, the most amount of passes that he's had, very logically, as a Laker, have come from either D'Angelo Russell or Dennis Schroeder. Makes a lot of sense. He is shooting in the high 20s from both of those guys. I can't pretend that I know the context of every single pass, setting up every single one of those threes. It's not hard to figure out. LeBron is one of the best passers in NBA history.
Well, it's also he collapses defenses differently. He does,
exactly.
Right. It's not just it's not literally just who's throwing the ball, in the sense of, like, is LeBron hitting Malik Beasley like when he's wide open and D'Angelo Schroeder aren't? I mean, it should be noted, LeBron is a more accurate passer than Dennis Schroeder. Like, all that's in, where you hit a guy in his hands as he's coming off a screen, all that matters.
Right. He's also, as good as anybody there ever is in terms of tracking guys as they're moving, so you can still hit them right in the sweet spot while they're in motion, all that stuff. But Darius's piece in particular, when he was talking about how Jarred Vanderbilt has been affected by the inability to play as more of a wing defender without LeBron there, because offensively, Jarred Vanderbilt's a garbage man. His position is irrelevant. He finds his offense. That's really what happens. You don't run anything for the guy. It got me really thinking about going with Rui in the starting lineup, because if you put Rui in there, you're not going to suffer offensively. You may not have the exact same gravitational threat as Beasley in terms of volume from outside, but you're still getting a scoring threat. He's still a scorer. You're going to keep the spacing that you have with Troy Brown and D'Angelo Russell. And then in the meantime, defensively, Rui can be your 4, allowing Jarred Vanderbilt to be more of that wing defender when he was more effective. And the other reason I was thinking about this is I think defensively, on balance, this could be better because Beasley, if he's not hitting shots, you're just suffering defensively for having him out there. A backcourt of defensively of D'Lo and Troy Brown is better than D'Lo and Beasley. Like it just is.
Yeah. I mean, I'm worried. I am honestly worried less about the defense right now because the defense has been so good. It's how, I think the one thing, and somebody else can look this up. How can the Lakers generate more offense from their defense? Because as stingy as they've been in allowing points, they have not turned teams over a lot. They're not getting out on the break a lot. These are things that impact Anthony Davis. These are probably things that impact, 3-point shooters, guys like Beasley who get out on the break and hit out on a wing and you can hit, with that, when you get that wide open, really good in rhythm catch and shoot. And then the other thing, I mean,
really quick on that. You might have more of an ability to do that if Jarred Vanderbilt's able to play more defense from the wing and have a little more ability to be along the perimeter, be where the ball might start out.
Yeah, I'm not. If they came out on Wednesday and said we're changing the starting lineup, these are not things that what I find fascinating about these kinds of questions is the ripple effect. Like, so, like a lot of people have been asking to start Austin Reeves. And I think the resistance there, and his minutes are going up, and you start to see different combinations. Like Reeves is playing big minutes for this team, and should. All of these things ripple around the roster. If you take Reeves, for example, out of the reserve lineup, and you put, say, Schroeder back there, Dennis has had some nice distribution nights. Again, both of us think he's played well overall. He's not quite the same kind of connecting player. Setup player, pick and roll, guy, that Reeves has sort of turned himself into. And so the combinations change. And so is Beasley going to be effective with this bench group? And where is it more effective? Like where does it matter more? Let's say you make it so Beasley's just not that useful, maybe until LeBron comes back. If you take him out of the starting lineup, you've improved the starting lineup. Have you improved the bench?
Well, I got a thought on that, but we will get into it next after letting everybody know that Locked On Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel, and we are in the home stretch of the NBA season, making this the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000, $1,000. It's bonus bets back, even if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Safe, secure, really easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers, threes drained, or get a little saucy with an exclusive bet like the 2x3, 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. And FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. As of this recording, Lakers are giving up 1.5, an old-fashioned bucket to the Suns, favored by 1.5. As we noted at the top of the show, KD, DeAndre Ayton will not be playing. They won't even be in LA. The Suns can use a win, but the Lakers need a win. So take all of that into account. Lay down your money as you will. Either way, do not miss out on your chance at a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Basketball GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your own basketball franchise? And this is a game for you. Download the game. You just visit ultimatebasketballgm.com or look it up in the app stores. Listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On. It's got to be in all caps. Locked On in the game Ultimate Basketball GM. We'll finish up this Beasley thing and the lineup thing. You had a point to make there about that, starter versus bench.
Well, in thinking about that ripple effect that you had mentioned in terms of how this could affect Beasley and in turn how it could affect the entire bench unit, one thing that we were told about, and when we previewed Malik Beasley with the host of Locked On Wolves, Ben Beekman, it was the idea that Beasley really, really is effective in transition in terms of getting his threes, and that he, that's an area where he described Beasley as elite. And I think on balance, a second unit that is led by Schroeder and Austin Reeves is going to be looking to run more than a first unit that is led by D'Angelo Russell, because Russell is much more. He's much more of a prober. He's much more methodical. Again, this changes with LeBron, but LeBron's not going to be there anytime soon. So you got to deal with the now. I actually wonder if that athleticism that Beasley specifically has in getting threes would actually flourish more in the second unit than with the current construction they have now.
It could. And it's not like Beasley's not used to coming off the bench. He's come, he's been a sixth man for, seventh man for much of his career, more than a starter. I reviewed his exact game records, but certainly as much. It's the other thing about this, and we'll move on. It's a tricky thing to make any lineup decisions right now, because the Lakers have had so little continuity that big changes that were, that sort of disrupt whatever ecosystem that they had developed. You had to really think about them hard, because, if you can't lose 5 minutes to, oh, wait, we're adjusting to this change. It's not a reason not to make them. It is a reason to think about them. And you probably only have a few of those that you can really go to between now and the end of the year. But your point about transition is really a good one. So let's see what they do. I think ultimately what they're probably going to do is just hope Malik Beasley starts shooting his way out of this slump, which is not, by the way, a terrible approach. I mean, he's not the first shooter to go through these sorts of things.
Or you'll just start seeing his minutes go down. You'll just start seeing more minutes for whoever accounts for what they expect from Malik Beasley on every level.
I think that's the other way to do it. Just shrink the minutes, keep the rotation relatively similar, and just expand or contract people's minutes that way. That is another really effective way of potentially handling it.
I mean, it's clear that Darvin Ham, has lost faith in Lonnie Walker, and as much as I would not object to Max Christie getting run. Here's the thing. I was going to say, I don't even want to get into a deep discussion about Christie.
Sure.
I'm just addressing this because I've heard it from a lot of fans. I wouldn't object to it because I've generally liked what we've seen from him, but I'm not going to kill Darvin for not doing it, because the overwhelming majority of coaches in this position right now would not turn to a one-and-done 20-year-old rookie who's barely played 500 minutes in his career.
I would actually criticize him for doing it, because I think the results – Max Christie has played very well in the context that you expect Max Christie to play, which was contribute virtually nothing. But if you start to review, again, the sort of like go back and look at Vanderbilt's on-court impact or whatever, the last stretch of games where Christie was playing a lot, his actual, his net rating, all that stuff was very low, well underwater. And so I like the kid as a player. I think he's going to turn into a good NBA player. Lakers did well in there. That's big difference between playing high leverage minutes and all that with the expectation and the need for somebody to come through. And, they just, Lonnie Walker's got problems defensively. There's no perfect solution here. But the Beasley question is also interesting because, the question of whether or not the Lakers would pick up that option, that $16 million option, if he finishes out the year shooting 29% from three as a Laker, the strong temptation is going to be to not spend that money. And, we were talking about Reeves for Tuesday's show, and the idea that at minimum, the Lakers are probably going to have to offer him that $4 and $50. That is the most that they can offer as a restricted free agent. Then they can match somebody else's deal. But I don't think the Lakers, if I'm Reeves' agent, that is my starting point for the Lakers. You max me out.
Hell yeah. Hell yes.
Yeah.
Again, the barrel that he has them over right now with the optics of you're going to let another valuable rotation player that was totally discovered by you, like your own guy, you're going to let him go for money too? Like, really? Really?
But it all kind of gets like the Lakers, when you start to put these guys together, if you're going to keep Reeves, And I cannot imagine them letting him go.
Unless he gets like an insane poison pill
Something just
backloaded like
absolutely
$80
absurd.
million. Like I would be surprised, and depending on the particulars, pretty mad if he's not on this team next year.
Right. I don't think they're going to let Vanderbilt go. For say what you want about the guy for $4.5, $5 million. Like that is a
no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
You start,
unless they're looking to go where I think you're going.
You start looking at like keeping D'Angelo Russell. It's like once you've kept like two of these guys, that's your cap space. Like it's not like, well, we can keep Reeves, but keep Russell, and then let the other guys go and go sign like three. That's none of that's not how any of this is going to work. You either clear the decks for Kyrie, and Mark Stein reporting that the Suns and the Lakers are still the most common teams mentioned as a potential destination for Kyrie. Big difference between saying that and the Suns and Lakers are interested in Kyrie. But those are the teams that are mentioned most often. Or, pick two between, Jeremy Grant and some of
Draymond Green.
Sure. That's what you can do that. You can clear the decks and get a couple decent players that way, or one starish player, however you're going to do it. Or you can kind of keep the guys you have. If you keep one or two of the guys that you have, Russell and Vanderbilt, and you let Beasley go and you let Hachimura go or whatever, you're probably going to end up having to fill that space with either your one exception that you might have left or a veteran minimum guy. Like that's what you have. So, I mean, I think, in some ways the Beasley thing, they kind of just need to cross their fingers and bring him back and bring all of these guys back. Re-sign Hachimura if the number is reasonable. Re-sign, try to bring back Mo Bamba. It's like, because you can't replace them. And if nothing else, you have guys then that you can turn around and trade.
The optionality that comes from within reason, running back this roster makes a strong case for doing it. In addition to the fact that when you consider everything these guys have had to deal with under these circumstances, the roster actually, it offers some promise. Like, none of this matters if LeBron and AD can't stay healthy, but assuming they can, and that's the whole reason you're doing this in the first place, it's not a bad roster to have around them.
No. And, your chances, as disappointing as Beasley has been to this point, you are not going to find a player with his track record and potential for even your mid-level, as a taxpayer. Like, you're just not going to get that. So
this is where, by the way, really quick, if you believe in Max Christie, I suppose you could say, like, you think he could become essentially your Beasley guy on a rookie deal. The difference being, though, A, you're taking more of a flyer on somebody totally unproven, and B, you lose the $16.5 million that could be used as part of a trade.
Right.
But
if this, this is where the budget that the Lakers run with as a family operation comes into play. They spend a lot of money, but they won't spend all the money. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show and participate in that great community of Lakers fans who will either be very excited or very angry on Thursday following the game. So make sure you check us out afterwards. We'll see everybody after the game.